Everything is energy. Everything is vibration and frequency and resonance. The law of attraction, if you will, is basically this idea that what comes into our life, what are the subconscious beliefs that I've been buying into that are causing me to think. I changed that idea, and that's when Raquel came into my life. Our physical mind is not capable of, the brain doesn't care what you want. It cares about 95% of our life is, it doesn't take much to say, okay, I want to find out some information that's going to help me. These limiting beliefs, in a way, protect us because whatever your beliefs are dictate what your thoughts. And the more I started applying the practical applications, the more I started noticing things started to change. There's a place for the ego. There are only 5 objective actual truths in the universe. The first is...
Thanks for your interest in sticking around to watch or listen to my podcast, dedicated to providing tools and resources to help you claim and live your best life. If you're loving these conversations, make sure you hit that bell to subscribe or follow and never miss an episode of the Chris Senise Podcast. Don't forget to tap the like and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Let's grow this community of curious, driven minds together. It's just been sort of like a bizarre week.
That's exciting.
I would say. And that's exciting for sure. But it's just like all these weird feelings, which I'm thinking, and then I'm thinking that what happened last week with the snafu, with just the... Like, I get reminded 50,000 times that I'm having a call coming up, and you got a call coming up, and then there was this, normally just don't send out questions like I did, but there was just like all of this flurry of questions coming at me that I wanted to make sure I covered with you. Great to talk about, but this thing that I'm just whatever. I'm just really glad that we're together. I wanted things for this specific interview.
All right. Well, anytime stuff out of the ordinary happens, usually we're on the brink of something exciting.
I would say so. Which brings me to when we were first trying to jump on the call, well, you were saying something about the collective. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the collective is just like this idea of like, all the people that we know, we have this sort of agreement of the way things kind of work, right? There's this thing called the, the Mandela effect.
I've heard of it. I've heard of the term.
It's the kind of same thing, like, in like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, everyone used to think it was like mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all. And it turns out that's not exactly what she said. And everybody is convinced that it was this way, but it wasn't that way. So there are collective agreements that sort of we all just choose to abide by. It all comes down to what we ourselves decide is true for us, right? It's like the idea of whatever your beliefs are dictate what your thoughts tend to be, right? And those thoughts kind of influence your emotions. And your thoughts and your emotions are manifested through the body in this sort of electromagnetic energy. And everything is energy. Everything is vibration and frequency and resonance. And so the law of attraction, if you will, is basically this idea that the thoughts and the emotions that we experience are being broadcasted out beyond our body and are connected to everyone and everything and everywhere in every time even. And what comes into our life is a direct reflection of that energy. And that's sort of how we attract the experiences that we tend to attract. So that's a very basic thing of the law of attraction and how it works.
You've been studying the law of attraction for over 20 years, correct?
Yeah. I got, I saw The Secret, which I think you saw The Secret. A lot of people seen this movie, and I was like, man, the first time I watched this, I was in a rough spot. I was like 22 or 23. I had my head so far up my butt. I mean, you couldn't see the light of day. And, I was into into chasing women and drugs and
Hmm.
alcohol and all this stuff. And it was basically the idea was whatever you are feeling and whatever vibe you're putting out is what's coming
Right.
back. That means that all of these circumstances that I know is not the way that I want to be living are a
Hmm.
direct result of what I was doing. Because up until that point, I was like, oh, it's the government. My parents
Right.
brought me up the wrong way. There's no opportunities for violinists and all of these limiting beliefs.
Right.
And I was putting my power in everything outside of me, and I was leaving it up to chance and circumstance and sort of hoping that things would improve. But then I saw that movie, and they sort of Disneyfied it. They said, okay, basically the idea that I got was sit in a corner and meditate. Imagine you're driving a Ferrari, and then there it will be, on your driveway with the keys ready and the beautiful woman in the front seat.
Yeah.
And I liked that idea, but there was always part of me that was like, I wanted to understand more of how it worked because I can't really follow something on blind faith. I need to have the experience of it, or I need to have a better understanding of the mechanics behind it. Otherwise, it just like it won't make a lot of sense for me. And so
Right.
that's when I attracted the next teachers. I think the next one was like Dr. Joe Dispenza, who really was like the science, the science, the science, the heart brain coherence and electromagnetism and epigenetics and all these ideas. And then Neville Goddard
Yeah.
kind of brought it in and sort of more of mystical. And I really like that. And then Abraham Hicks and Bob
Right.
Proctor and Wallace Wattles. And now all these teachers just started kind of coming out of nowhere. And the more I read and sort of studied what they were saying, and the more I started applying the practical
Hmm.
applications that they would recommend, the more I started noticing things started to change. Pretty soon after, really 10 years of being pretty lonely, having a girlfriend that I was convinced I was going to marry, and that, relationship fell apart. I basically created this story in my head that, oh, I would never meet the right one. And, maybe I was not dateable or whatever. And I changed that idea. And that's when Raquel came into my life. And, we've been married for 9 years really happily. And then, so that was great. Everything was going great. I was doing what I love to do, teaching tennis, but, financially, we weren't doing very well. And that was the one thing. Like I grew up playing violin, and I was just like, okay, violinists just don't make a lot of money. I'll have a lot of
Hmm.
fun. I'll be in a career that I'm really passionate about, but probably it won't be the thing. I just won't be rich, and that's fine. But then I
Right.
started getting into this stuff, and I said, well, maybe it is possible.
Yeah.
And if it's true that everything is energy, then I can start to create this energy of abundance. And what would that be like? And um, we were in a two-bedroom apartment. I had my daughter there. She was 6 years old at the time, and the lights got turned off right in the middle of us playing Monopoly. And it's like that dark moment of the soul, where you're like, God, I'm gonna have to lie to my daughter and tell her we're having a camp out because we couldn't afford the electric bill.
Right.
And that was the moment where I was like, all right, we gotta figure out, what are the subconscious beliefs that I've been buying into that aren't objectively
Right.
true, that are
Hmm.
causing me to think certain thoughts and making me feel lack and limitation. And let me examine those and kind of get curious about them. And that's when we manifested our dream home that we live in now. Like we were in the middle of COVID, the tennis courts had just been locked down. There were no courts to coach on. I had
Hmm.
no way to make money, but we had this idea, and we would visualize and we would meditate, and we would always see ourselves walking out of the front
Hmm.
yard into the backyard where the tennis court was, and meeting clients. And we can get into some of the tools I used, I guess. But it was like, then I got the phone call from a friend who said, I met a woman that you coached 10 years ago. We found out we both knew you. And she said, if you ever
Right.
need a court to coach on, to please call her. So I called
Oh.
her, and had a great conversation with her. And about 30 minutes into the conversation, she says, if you need a court to coach on, just coach on this one because nobody's living there. And I said, that's amazing. And, one day we'll buy the house from you. And we had no way, Chris, no way to buy the house. I mean, we had no money. But she was serious about it. She says, come over for dinner. And she started selling us
Uh-huh.
on buying the house from her. And she sweetened the pot to the point where we said we'd be crazy if we didn't do this. And now we live in the
Right.
house, and it's
That's
just,
awesome.
it's been incredible. It's been an incredible ride.
I mean, I think we could talk about what led me to you because you know that these are all things that in my own life I've seen play out. It hasn't been a perfect journey, but I've gotten better at it along the way. I've had people say things to me like, yeah, yeah, keep living in La La Land. And I mean, but it's like really great here. I mean, things actually do work out sometimes. And I think that fundamentally, I've seen that happen in my life, but didn't really know how it was happening. I just made a concerted effort to think differently, act differently, but you took it like an extra notch because, and here's another question I have for you. I actually have this question for you that I was, because in some of the questions I sent you beforehand, one of those was how important is it that your wife did the journey with you? Because I see often that it's a couple and one strongly believes and the other one's kind of like, yeah, okay, yeah, not too sure. But you've talked a lot about meditating and specifically with your wife going through the process with her. Could it have turned out differently if she had not been part of that?
Oh yeah, I mean, anything could have happened, you know. I think it's like when you're compatible with someone, you're on a similar wavelength, you
Yeah.
know, most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we're there all the time. Sometimes,
Right.
you know, the
Right.
Chargers blow a 27-0 lead in the playoffs and I'm inconsolable, and sometimes she has a
Uh-huh.
tough day. So it's like we're always kind of fluctuating a little bit, but like the main ideas, like the big pillars, I think we agree on. And I think you're
Yeah.
right. It's important that you're both at least open to the possibility that there's a
Uh-huh.
better way to do things, because
Right.
the norm is like, okay, if we want to achieve something, then we got to put our nose to the
Mm-hmm.
grindstone. We got to
Yeah.
work our tails off. We're going to have to do a lot of things that we don't like to do. And it's all about sacrifice. And that's one way to do
Right.
things, you know, as Dr.
Right.
Joe calls it, matter to matter. Like, but
Okay.
everything is fundamentally energy. And so if you realize
Right.
that, then you start to say, okay, maybe there's another way. Maybe there's a way that we can raise our energy together and we can combine
Yeah.
forces, so to
Yeah.
speak, and become very
Mm-hmm.
clear about a common goal or an intention that we both
Mm-hmm.
agree on that is good for us and it's good for everybody involved, and do our best to resonate at that frequency, to act as that person that would naturally have that, to act as that
Right.
couple that would just, as a matter of circumstance, manifest those things. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's important. I think, but also I think that, you know, some certain things
Mm-hmm.
she gets so intuitively that I was always like the analytical guy. I had to like be banging my head against the wall saying, well, it's like this because of that, and it's this
Okay.
because of that. And she would just sort of know certain things. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually I got to the point where she's at, which is just knowing certain things, and vice
Right.
versa. Certain things that kind of make sense to me, like she doesn't necessarily grab right away. But I think,
Right.
you know, we're both pretty
Yeah.
open-minded about these things. And for the most part, aren't attached to this is the way it has to be. Because there's
Yeah.
always, you know, you can be right
Right.
and I can be right. And we can be
Right.
right together and we can, you know, create together.
Well, you mentioned the analytical mind coming in, and so we can now shift to the ego, right? Because that is the ego basically playing against what we're trying to manifest, right? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, in manifesting, it's almost believing in something that cannot be analyzed and your egos go step in and try and correct things, and is that and how we think, would that be a correct statement?
Well, like we can talk about the ego two ways. Like there's the
Okay.
ego, which is just the personality, right? It's like the mask
Okay.
that we wear in three-dimensional reality, and it's kind of based on our beliefs and the way we think
Okay.
and the way we feel. And then there's the negative ego, which is kind of like that ego that says, "Oh, I need to be the best. I need to have a Ferrari because this is what society tells me that I need, and this
Okay.
is the programming that I received." And the negative ego, I think, is something that can be overcome, and I'm in the process of it. I've I haven't gotten there yet, but it's just something that ultimately gets in the way, of us becoming the truest version of ourselves. And it comes from
Yeah.
attachment to ideas, to beliefs, to positions, to status, to all of these things that ultimately,
Hmm.
in the grand scheme of things, don't matter that much. So yeah, I think there's a place for the ego, which is like, okay, if I want to get really good at something, um, part of me says, okay, if I'm going to go out and I'm going to perform in
Yeah.
front of a million
Yeah. Yeah.
people, like you're a musician, I'm a musician, we're going to get up there on stage. There's got to
Yeah.
be a part of
Definitely.
us that wants to practice, that wants to rehearse, that wants to write and
Sure.
do all of that stuff because we can see ourselves in some way in standing in front of this crowd
Right. Right.
and wanting to give them the best experience possible. But I think the magic
Right.
is when we can release the attachment to that outcome and say, okay, that's our intention, but if there's something greater that needs to come through, then it'll come through and we're okay with that and we won't resist it if that happens.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Because we've already spoken. We spoke before this episode of filming, and one of the things that I struggle with myself is the difference between visualization, because I think it's easier to attach to an outcome, but it's not the outcome we should be attached to, right? The feeling, and we've talked about assumption, and for something that is as fruitful as being in that state, it seems so hard. Why does it seem so hard to me? It seems like a hard thing because I think outcome is something that you can visualize. How will it look in the end? And one thing you said to me that really stuck to me was because if you attach to that outcome, you don't know if there's something better for you.
100%. Yeah. Well, if you think about it, like the only
Ye-
reason we want anything is because we think we're going to feel better when we have that thing,
Right,
right? Like people think, oh, I want money. Well, why do they want money? They want
right.
freedom, right? They want the ability to do whatever they want,
Mm-hmm.
whenever they want, with whoever they want, as many times as they want.
Okay.
And they want that
Yeah,
feeling of freedom,
yeah.
is ultimately it, right? So the money is just one symbol of freedom that we've associated with freedom. But that's not the only way to be free. When you go back and you remember that experience,
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, you're in that energy of freedom. Maybe not exactly the way you were, but you're in that energy. And paradoxically, when you stay in that energy, all of the manifestations that are reflections of that energy start to fill in because everything is vibration and resonance. So when you're vibing at that level, if you need the money to continue acting on your passions because that's the path of least resistance in order to do that, then the
Mm-hmm.
universe through synchronicity will bring you that money. But a lot of times, like we talked about, money isn't the fastest way to get what you want anyway. If you have $100 bill and you really want a candy bar, you need a quarter. You don't need $100 bill because the
Yeah,
$100 bill won't go in the candy machine.
right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's realizing that there are infinite possibilities,
Right.
infinite potentials because there are infinite frequencies and each frequency carries a different set of information, a
Okay.
different reality, if you will. Then it's pretty egotistical to think that I know the one outcome that it has to be, otherwise nothing else
Mm,
counts. So it's
yeah.
like, yeah, there's and the universe will always bring it to you in a way that you can't expect it and you can't predict it because it wants you to keep doing that, keep exploring more of who
Right.
you are, keep releasing the old ways of programming and thinking that were keeping us limited. And as we do
Hmm.
that, it'll keep revealing more and more treasures for us.
Yeah. And I mean, a great exercise, believe me, in the weeks since I spoke to you, right, I've gone down my rabbit hole of lack, right? Just asking where my sense of lack comes from in multiple things, right? It's not just one thing. But so I did that exercise that you gave me last week, and a lot came out of that, because it's like you ask a question, you answer it, then you ask it, you ask a question to that answer. That's how I did it. I could go down and be like, okay, you know, where does my lack of never having, feeling like I have enough savings, where does my lack, or where do feelings of rejection and abandonment come from? So down, like we're talking pages of this until I've understood where that was coming from. So, quick plug, right? You can find Ramon Osa where? Because you have a lot of coaching on this, a lot. So, let's go ahead and put you right here, yeah?
You can find me on YouTube if you just type in like Ramon Osa Law of Attraction or Ramon Osa Manifestation. I
Oh,
have a tennis YouTube channel too. So, but if you type in manifestation or Law of
cool.
Attraction, I'll come up, and there's always stuff in the comments there. I should have a website. I don't have a website yet, but I will.
I mean, I know how to build those, so just in case, but I've had to write, with my own podcast and, do so many things. 90 days ago, April 1st, actually, I had no idea to how to run a podcast or create what or how it's done or whatever. And I just went finding a way because I was compelled. I think that I feel like the information that I put on my podcast, the same way you're doing your videos on YouTube, it's because I want people to feel good and do better and, find, what makes that fire in their belly go. And so it's become really important to me. And I think digging and looking for more information on that, I found you. And there were a lot of people out there that do what you do, but there was something about you that I was like, ah, I like how he breaks it down into like 10 to 12-minute videos because literally that's my attention span. And I was like, oh my God, I really want to talk to this guy. And I think we also, it's like you talk about Joe Dispenza, Neville Goddard, Bashar, and those are also people who I think are influencing my journey. And you mentioned that last week when we met, something about that my frequency led me to you, or like vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, there are no accidents, right? Like
Yeah.
everything is a coincidence, but if you start to realize that everything is a symbol in some way and
Mm-hmm.
everything is an opportunity to be used constructively, then you can say, okay, I
Mm-hmm.
had this idea that I wanted to have
Yeah.
Ramon on the podcast, and you reached out to me. And then we
Mm-hmm.
got on a phone call together. We did a coaching session. That was all orchestrated. That was all part of the process. And, you know,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think there are absolutely no accidents, and
Yeah.
there's a reason that we're talking. We don't know what it is. We can't tell, like, where this is going to lead, but we can
Right.
always look back and connect the dots and say, of course I needed to meet Chris because we had this conversation
Yeah.
and this made me realize that, and she led me to this, and then he led me to that. And it's always cool going back and connecting the dots. Like I'm sure when you met your husband or you had your
Definitely.
daughter, like you can start and thinking those like, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. And
Yeah.
this made me start thinking about this, and that led me to that. And we can always connect them looking back, but not necessarily know where it's going to go because our physical
Right.
mind is not capable of conceiving how things will happen. The physical mind is only capable of recognizing how things have happened or how things are happening. And so we can
Mm-hmm.
come up with this plan of, I want to build a million-person follower podcast. I want to become a world-class musician, or I want to do this, I want to do that. And how that happens, though, we have absolutely no control over. But if we follow this
Right.
formula that we've talked about, Chris, that every moment that you act on
Yeah.
your highest excitement and your highest passion, in that process, we align with our true self, because that is the physical demonstration of alignment, is when we're in that state of excitement and passion.
Yeah.
And then we do that thing to the best of our ability. We take it as far as we can until we can't take it any further. And we do it with
Mm-hmm.
no assumption or insistence on what the outcome is. And that's the kind of tricky part. um, then we attune our energy to the highest version of ourselves. And by definition, because everything is energy, frequency, and resonance, the only thing that can come to us when we're in that state, when we're acting on our passions,
Right.
are more things to be passionate about, because that's the energy that we're putting out. So
Yeah.
how that manifests, we have no idea, but we know that we can stay in a positive state no matter what happens, even if the circumstances that come
Right.
from acting on that passion are unpreferred.
Right.
Staying in a positive state no matter what happens is, I think, is a superpower. And that formula allows the universe, because you're demonstrating through your action that you are who you claim to be, who you want to be. Because look, I'm actually doing the thing. And we
Yeah.
can talk about that if you'd like, which is why I'm so thrilled to be talking with you, is you're actually doing the thing. You're doing the podcasts, your music coming from finance,
I
and
am.
that's beautiful. And so that's the idea, is like just acting on that highest excitement every moment that you can, and knowing that it will always support you, to be more of who you are,
Right.
always. Because as we know, you're here for a reason. You were put here for a reason. And all that is would not have put you here if it wasn't going to give you everything that you needed in order to become more of who you are and more of who you prefer to be, and continue to evolve into the person that you choose to become.
Thanks for your interest in sticking around to watch or listen to my podcast, dedicated to providing tools and resources to help you claim and live your best life. If you're loving these conversations, make sure you hit that bell to subscribe or follow and never miss an episode of the Chris Senise Podcast. Don't forget to tap the like and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Let's grow this community of curious, driven minds together. Let's talk about something we hear Neville Goddard say a lot, and that's about not that we're not supposed to be chasing things. We're not supposed to be stressing ourselves out, enslaving ourselves. That the importance, and he talks about the importance of stillness a lot. But how important are those limiting beliefs in keeping us from everything we want, right? It can seem difficult unless you, I know it has been for me, it's like this mental trigger where you have to pause, like you were saying about the flat tire. You take that pause and you say, okay, I'm glad this is happening. I'm learning from it. I'm growing from it. The situation was meant to be. Take the person out of it, pause, and seek gratitude in anything that's happening versus getting upset, getting mad, and feeling like it's keeping you from things. I think many people fail to understand what the reality is in those limiting beliefs, and I don't even think some people know that there's a limiting belief, right? But you know that comes from things we've grown up hearing.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you brought this up and you asked about, where people can find me. I actually created a document called the Subconscious Reset,
Mm-hmm.
because science knows that 95% of our life is, by the time we're 35, is run by our
Mm-hmm.
subconscious mind. And our
Mm-hmm.
subconscious mind is responsible for making us breathe and beating our hearts and replicating our cells. But it's also when we go
Right.
on autopilot,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, have you ever been in the car and you're talking to a friend or you're listening to a
Yeah.
podcast or whatever, and then like time vanishes and then you just show up at your destination and you're like, who in the heck was driving the car? 95% of our life is that. And it's based on what we believe is
Okay.
true. Now, here's the critical thing.
Okay.
There are only 5 objective actual truths in the universe that I've found from my perspective. The first is that you
Right.
exist. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. You know, you
Yeah.
wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't exist. The second is that everything is here and everything is now, right? So all there is really is the present moment. And what we call the future,
Hmm.
what we call the past, are just constructs in our mind or quote unquote memories of the past. The third is the all is one and the one is in all. And that is, we are fractals
Okay.
of God and we are all gods inside of us, reflecting back to it one of an infinite number of
Hmm.
perspectives. And it created us because it was the one, and the one did not have perspective of itself. So it sort of splintered off into all of these little fragments so that it could learn more about itself through all these different perspectives. The fourth is that you get what you put out. And that's
Right.
the law of attraction, right? Everything is energy and resonance. And so that's an absolute law of the universe.
Right.
And the fifth is that everything changes
Mm.
except the 4 laws. So you and I are not the same person that we were half a second
Okay.
ago, right? Our brain has reorganized itself. It's fired and wired in all these new patterns. And as people are listening to this, they're having this change in perspective. Our cells are dying off at trillions of cells a second. So we're not the same that we were half a second ago. And that's a actually huge realization we might come back to later. Everything except those 5 truths is a belief. Okay. Is it actually true that I'm just make something up. You can't be rich if you grew up in
Right.
Georgia or if you grew up in a
Hmm.
small city, or is it true that you can't, find love if you're X, Y, and Z? No, of course not. Unless you believe that's the case.
Right.
But the point is, if you can find one person that has been in that circumstance and has overcome that or have created in spite of being in that situation, then that's proof that it's not objectively true that just because you're in this city or you're in this sex or you're in this demographic or you
Hmm.
grew up in this household, some of the people that create the most amazing things had the hardest
Right.
time growing up. So the
Right.
idea is everything is about
Makes
beliefs,
sense.
and you get to choose your beliefs.
Right.
You're choosing what you believe to be true. Now, you may not have known that you've been choosing those beliefs, but once you start examining them and you start looking at the results that you're getting in your life, and you ask yourself the question, what would I have to
Hmm.
believe is true in order to be experiencing this? Then you can start to unravel it and say, okay, I've been buying into the fact that because I'm a musician, I'll never make any
Right.
money. There's a lot of musicians that made plenty of money. So
Right.
why am I
It's a
buying
tough
into
one.
that idea? Why am I choosing to believe that? What am I gaining from buying into that concept? Because you're only going to believe anything that you believe serves you in some way.
Right.
So that's kind of how beliefs um, influence everything,
Yeah.
really.
I think a turning point for me was when I first started examining limiting beliefs was to just kind of take a step back and ask myself, well, how has that been working for you? Because if it hasn't, then even if you shift to another limiting belief, at least you're recognizing that that's not working for you and you should try a different avenue perhaps. But I just, I believe in this stuff, like I really believe in it. And I wish more people understood and saw it because it's actually like right in front of us, but we're not seeing it. So when do you think that changed? Like, was there a time where we as a society knew these things and then maybe stop seeing them, or do you just think some people have always been more attuned versus others?
Well, I think going back to what you said, like, why can't we see it? Like, if you're ever in a really good mood and then someone comes in a really, they're really pissed off or they're really upset and there's something,
Right.
it won't take long.
Yeah.
Like, either you'll be in such a high vibe that
Okay.
anything they say isn't going to affect you, or you'll
Yeah.
get to the point where like, I don't want anything to do with this person because they're trying to bring me down and I'm not about it, so I'm going to
Yeah.
leave,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And likewise, if I'm in
Yeah.
a if I'm in a bad mood and somebody comes by whistling Dixie and saying, the hills are alive, I'm gonna want to punch them in the nose because I'm not in that vibe. I can't receive that message if I'm in that state.
Oh.
So that's the
Got it.
principle of not being able to receive information that's not in harmony with where I'm at, with where my
Mm.
vibe is at the moment, with my frequency. It's not that anything's being hidden from us. It's just that we've been trained um, to believe in the idea of lack and of limitation because certain entities, maybe not maliciously, saw it as an opportunity to get us to do what they wanted us to
Right.
do.
Mm-hmm.
But now ignorance is a choice, because you can go on
Mm.
YouTube and you can learn anything. I mean, if you're really
Yeah.
hungry for freedom and
True.
hungry
That's
for
true.
change, it doesn't take much to say, okay, I want to find out some
Mm-hmm.
information that's going to help me. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that idea. You can see the sort of structures of the education system, the health system. I mean, people
Mm-hmm.
now, you get a diagnosis now, you go on YouTube, and pretty soon you're an expert as much as 90% of the people that got the degrees. And you're
Right.
not going to just sign up for some crazy surgery. You're going to explore
Right.
every other option. And same thing with all of the other ideas. So
I would agree with that, right? Like it's perhaps for a long time we just, if someone didn't expose you to this, it didn't exist. But yes, truly, I mean, I think there's even, I can't remember who it was that I saw in an interview that said the same thing. Like there's almost no excuse for you not to learn something new, because 90 days on YouTube is like the equivalent of, it's so focused, right? So on what you want, on what you need, and at the same time with the information that comes to you and goes back to, you start to attract that, and you could call it an algorithm or whatever, but what you need you can find.
totally, you
Hmm.
said it perfectly. And I think that everybody's at a different point in their journey. And so, the Chris from 5 years ago would have needed something different than the Chris today. And it's just like with
Right.
everybody, I think there's a deep intuitive sense that this stuff is true, that this works, this is
Right.
the way things work. And it's like when you hear this information, you start to go,
Hmm.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you begin to attract the information and the people and the circumstances that you need to reflect
Right.
back to you positively or negatively what you need in that moment. And I think when you start to see the possibilities and you actually start to experience the synchronicities and the people
Yes.
and the things that show up, it just makes you hungry for more.
Agreed. You know, I think over time, when you when you mentioned the thing about Chris 5 years ago, it reminds me so much of, there's been something in this world that's changed over the last 10 years. And it's almost like I was one person up until 10 years ago. And then something just dramatically changed in me over the past 2 years. And in like 2 years, I look at myself and I see where I am, and I just like, I take that pause, and who would have thought this? And I'm just like a completely unrecognizable person. I think these little nuggets of information that came to me over the years, I've been implementing and just learning so much. And I can tell you with so much certainty, I look back to Chris years ago, I don't even recognize her. I'm like, who's that girl? However, what is interesting is that the Chris today recognizes 5-year old Chris for sure. So weird.
You're
Go ahead, go
climbing
ahead.
up the mountain and you can see
Uh huh.
your entire journey now, and you can say, oh yeah, now I see, that version of me, that was in the muck, that was struggling, and how that was such an important part for my evolution, because
Yeah,
had I not gone through
definitely.
that, then I wouldn't have been
Mm-hmm.
able to appreciate, where I'm at today. And
Yeah,
and that's the next version of us is going to do the same thing,
for
looking
sure.
back at, where we are now.
That 5-year old Chris, when I think about who she was onto something. I always think about how everything for me was about like entertainment and speaking. And so when I look back now, even at my career, I'm like, okay, so it's no wonder that, singing is my passion and I'm a songwriter, because songwriting and writing in general is a form of communication. And then I, if you just told me a year ago I'd be running a podcast, I'd be like, oh, why would I be doing a podcast and what would it be about? I would have automatically defaulted to, well, it's either got to be music or finance because that's, what runs my world and what I specialize in. And then in these 2 years, like this year alone, I don't recognize Chris from a year ago of everything, especially because of these kinds of topics, right? The digging down YouTube and learning new things. I've always gravitated towards them. Like they've literally dominated me in the last year, and I'm actually like very passionate about it. And I guess where I'm going in my life, everything's been through a means of communication, whether it was writing, singing, and I guess now being a podcast host, because I wasn't expecting it to be. I wasn't expecting to be interview based. I would have assumed that if I was running a podcast, it'd be me talking about being an expert in something, and I think that would get very boring if I was only talking about finance and then only talking about music.
I think this is such a good point, because all of us go through this idea of like imposter syndrome, where we have a passion
Yes.
that we are like, this is something that we really want to do. And it was like this for me. It's probably people listening to this will probably
Hmm.
understand this. And you're like, this is what I want to do. But I can't
Right.
possibly do that because I'm not an expert, because I don't have the experience and da 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 da. Da. But the important thing to understand is like, if you can help one
It's a good
person,
one.
if one person needs to hear what you have to say and will benefit from the message, then it's the best thing that you can possibly do. And even if there wasn't a
Hmm.
person, if
Right.
it's indicative
Right.
of your passion and what you truly are excited by doing,
Hmm.
then that alone is the reason to do something, because that's your soul's highest expression of is following your passions, following your bliss. And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking like, man, I would love to do something like that. I'd love to paint. I'd love to tell stories. I'd love to join the circus, whatever.
Yeah.
Then understand that there's real
Right.
concrete science behind doing this. It's just physics and
Hmm.
allowing the universe to bring you what you need when you need it in order to do that. Now, in the same breath, he says, speaking out of both sides of his mouth, you have to honor your current belief system, right? Like, so we talked about if
Okay.
I just quit my job and I'm going to join the circus, but I don't have a true belief that it can support me, then that would be sort of probably not the wisest thing, right? Don't jump out of the airport and the airplane unless you have a parachute on.
Okay.
But you
Yeah.
can start acting on your passion from where you are to whatever degree
Right.
that you're able to, and allow the universe to show you and demonstrate to you that it will support you, and that there are so many forms of abundance other than
Yeah.
money that we talked about on our call, Chris, that
Yeah.
will bring you what you need when you need
Hmm.
it.
That's a great point because, one of the questions I have is what do you already that in your statement just that you just made, but when people say watch out with that's dangerous, you shouldn't do that, like be careful what you wish for type thing, and that's a limiting belief, right? But I'm glad you said what you said, because there are people that say that, you know, don't follow your passions, be like, everybody did that, where would we be? And then I ask myself, like, yeah, exactly, where would we be? That would actually really be a great thing if everybody was just coming from a place of that deep, like, I don't even know, even that what word to use, but that deep passion, that gusto in life, you know. And I wish more people would.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
man, you said a lot there. Imagine if everybody on the planet
Right.
was truly following their passion, following their bliss.
Mm-hmm.
By definition, everybody
Mm-hmm.
would
Yeah.
be in passion and bliss and excitement. And by definition,
Mm-hmm.
there could not be any war, there could not be any lack. So I sound like a Beatles
Mm-hmm.
song right now, but and the only way to get to that, by the way, is
Mm-hmm.
for you and
Mm-hmm.
for me and for the people listening to individually
Yes.
do that. You
Right.
can't change anybody,
Yeah.
but what you can do is reflect to everybody what's possible. And
Mm-hmm.
when people
Sure.
start seeing you acting on
Right.
your passions, they're like, man, she's happy all the time. I wonder why. Let me ask her.
Yeah.
And then you start explaining your greatest truth and why you decided to do this and the principles that you understand. Then it starts to spread and it really becomes this tipping point where pretty soon all of us will be doing that. And the
Sure.
ones that don't will be, somewhere else. And that's totally fine too. I want to say one more thing. A lot of times when people are
Sure.
trying to keep you from acting on something, they're doing that from their own state of
Mhm.
disconnection, right? So when you start doing this stuff early, I think it's a good idea
Yeah.
to not tell a lot of people. Just get busy doing the thing and do it because you love it. And when you feel
Hmm.
secure and you feel solid with where you are, then you can tell the
Yeah.
world. Um, all I can tell you is my wife and I always say, like, 3 or 4 years ago when we were in this new house and our mortgage had more than doubled what we were trying to pay in our two-bedroom apartment. And we were
Right.
going through some turbulence. It's like, man, it always works out. I don't know how it's going to work out, but it always works out. Now it's not blind faith, it's understanding that the only thing that can come to us is what is a reflection of the energy that we're putting out. And so the most important thing is that we are aware of what energy we're in, what energy we prefer to be in, and then acting on that from that state. And as long as we're doing
Mm-hmm.
those things, as long as we're demonstrating to the universe that this is who we prefer to be,
Okay.
um, and we're doing the things like examining our beliefs and finding the ones that no longer serve us and letting those go, we'll always be supported. And it happens enough times, then you just say, okay, this is just the way it works. And so there are a lot of stories that we could talk about. Maybe we'll do another podcast, in the future and
Mm-hmm.
and talk about those. But
Yeah.
I think the idea is to understand that everything is always working out for us, and you know,
Hmm.
we have the potential to look at the positive meaning behind anything that
Right.
happens.
One thing that I want to highlight today on today's episode specifically is that I want our audience to understand, when we talk about what limiting beliefs, the role that limiting beliefs play in our lives, and how those beliefs are literally a mirror to how things turn out. Can you explain that? Because we've been talking about how well it works to be in the I am and to be able to assume the feeling, but that works in the opposite way as well.
Totally. Well,
Mm-hmm.
the brain doesn't care what you
Mm-hmm.
want. It cares about survival.
Mm-hmm.
And so, back when we were cavemen and cavewomen, we had to be hyper vigilant about the saber-toothed tiger and famine and all these things that
Mm-hmm.
could kill us. And that was really adaptive back in the day because if we didn't pay attention to those things, then we would die.
Mm-hmm.
But now we don't have saber-toothed tigers. We have bills, we have taxes, we have
Yeah.
spouses where we have disagreements and these things that cause
Yeah.
us to go into this state of fight or flight. And so these limiting beliefs, in a way, protect us because if we're not always paying attention to the things that could go wrong, then there's a part of us that thinks that it will go wrong
Okay.
and then we'll die, basically. So they served their purpose very well for us. They kept us safe. They kept us from, sticking our neck out and getting our head chopped off. But now it's like, okay, if I was embarrassed as a fourth grader who got up on stage to sing at the talent show and my voice squeaked or whatever, and now I have this irrational fear of being up on
Okay.
stage or being the center of attention, then now I'm not able to share the gifts that I might have, because I've got this story that I'm not a good public speaker or people are going to laugh at me or I don't have anything good to say or you fill in the blank. That all came from that one
Hmm.
experience.
Right.
But if we look at it objectively and we say, okay, that was then, that was me then, and this is me now, and I'm going to choose a new belief, then I can do
Right.
that and I can have a brand new experience. So they do work in both directions and it's a choice. I think that's the main thing is like if you're choosing not to do something that you
Hmm.
know is part of your
Right.
passion, the only reason you would do that is because you have a belief about something bad happening as a result of following your passion. And that's a direct contradiction in
Hmm.
terms. You can't authentically be in your passion and have anything go wrong.
Right.
It's just, it's a two different vibrations. You can't have that. It's passion, bliss, excitement is what going to attract those things. And then fear and anxiety is going to attract something different. So
Yeah.
it absolutely works in both directions, and it's a choice. And it might not happen right away. It might take some reflection, like you're talking about going into this for a week. I've been doing this for years and really examining, like,
Right.
what are the beliefs that are getting in the way of me blocking,
Right.
achieving whatever it is that I want to achieve, and can I unravel those?
I think that you've been one of my favorite people to find. And I think that I'm so glad that you did this episode because we've touched on some of these on the top podcast. I've had Dr. James Hart, who runs the BioCybernaut Institute, and that is literally elevating your frequencies. He does neurofeedback training to elevate alpha brainwaves. I know we talked about brave waves a little last week, but somehow the direction that I expected this podcast to go in initially, it's still on that track because it's about living your best life, but it's derailed in this direction. So I'm happy that it's doing that because this direction brings me a lot of happiness. And I think it's like how they say the proof is in the pudding, doing something you're passionate about, and that's where the abundance will be. And it brings me a lot of joy, and I really loved having you on the podcast. So thank you really for giving me your time and for dealing with all the snafus that came with it. But talk to me a little more about your document. We're going to add it to the comments, to the description below. But how'd you come about this document? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about beliefs. So this document
Mm-hmm.
was created so that, you might say, well, what are my limiting beliefs? What are the things that are
Mm-hmm.
holding me back? And how do I find
Mm-hmm.
those out? Well, that's
Yeah.
what this document does. It takes you through a questioning process to discover exactly what those limiting beliefs are, and then
Mm-hmm.
through a questioning process that will naturally lead you to see that they are not true, and then take you through the process of replacing those beliefs with more empowering beliefs. Um, and
Excellent.
it's great. We had like 8,000 people go through it, have had some really profound changes, and be happy to share that with your audience.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for being on today's podcast. Thanks for your interest in sticking around to watch or listen to my podcast. dedicated to providing tools and resources to help you claim and live your best life. If you're loving these conversations, make sure you hit that bell to subscribe or follow and never miss an episode of the Chris Senise Podcast. Don't forget to tap the like and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Let's grow this community of curious, driven minds together.